everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, we meet here to connect, inspire, and create with the help of a guest speaker that shares our images, stories of inspiration, and helpful tips and techniques to show you how to improve your photography skills. The schedule for our upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com. Under Happiness Hour, you'll find the links to previous sessions on my YouTube channel. Tonight's guest is Fitch. Chris is a North Texas travel and landscape photographer who captures the essence of a place from the bright and shiny urban scenes of downtown Dallas to the abandoned and almost forgotten farmhouses along Texas roads. In tonight's presentation, what is your camera telling you? Chris will help us understand what we are seeing on the back of our camera. We take pictures that the camera tells us are well exposed, but may not get what we wanted. Chris will talk about listening to what our camera tells us and what to do if we disagree. If you're on Instagram, you can find Chris at Fitch Photo. Photo is F-O-T-O, and on his website at cfitchphoto.com. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Chris.
Thank you. Good to be here. And just to let people know, my website is in transition, so I've been waiting for them to transition it to my new website, but for some reason the website gods have not blessed it yet. So.
Well, I'll be honest, I've been nagging you. Is it up? Is it up? Oh, so give him a little bit more time. So Chris, like I said earlier, I met you through Instagram, but we're, and we met up, we started shooting, and I don't really know much about, when did you get into photography? What draws you to this art? Do you want to kind of give us a little bit of background, because you don't have an about page for me to stalk, so I just made up stuff as I went. So what did I leave out? So
if you could forward it to me, that would be great, so I'd learn about myself. My first camera was in 1981, and so deep in the film days and those sorts of things. That's when I first got a 35 millimeter. It was not a point and shoot, and started operating all the mechanisms to begin to take pictures. And it just progressed. There had been kind of a thread with it started, then all the way through different jobs, had different elements of images. I worked for a printing press company where we did 4-color printing. Actually worked on the printing presses, but actually learned about 4-color printing in the process. Worked with a number of different applications of this, but I just always had an interest, I guess, in doing photography, and it just has been kind of my Zen thing that I try really hard not to take it too seriously, but I fail at most of the time.
Well, I think we talked about this earlier. It's just something that we keep learning, and every time we go out, we get a little bit better. And if we shoot with other people that are better photographers, we actually improve ourselves. So, I mean, I think that's the fun part about photography for me is we can be standing, and it's happened, we can be standing shoulder to shoulder, and I'm like looking at his picture. What is he shooting? I don't even see that. And I'm standing right next to you. So this has been kind of a fun and learning craft, I guess, for me. Mm-hmm. And, and I'm going to say this on air, but, you're one of those people that I can feel like I can call and go, I don't get this. I don't understand it. And you've been really patient is the right word, about breaking stuff down and dumbing it down for me without making me feel dumb. So I appreciate that. And so I think that I'm hoping that translates here tonight, that other people will go, oh my gosh, so the greatness of Fitch. So with that, you want to get started?
Sure, let's go.
All right.
So just to give you a little bit of my history, my I'll try to say this where it doesn't sound like I'm bragging, but I probably am. I'm a fifth generation Texan. My relatives came to Texas in the early 1800s time frame, so we have lots and lots of Texas sand in our craw. And most of where my folks came from are in all the places that you wouldn't want to go. They're kind of the places you drive past if you're going to Big Bend or something like that. It's just in Nowhereville, where all the really ultra independent people that came to really establish themselves in Texas were very, very independent and very very out in the wild of Texas. And so I spent a lot of time not even realizing it. We would go out on the front porch every time. Well, we would go out at night and just sit on the front porch in the front porch swing and watch the weather come in or watch shooting stars go over or whatever it might be. But we literally would just get on the front porch and watch storms come in and watch them roll in and watch the lighting and all of those sorts of things. And it just got to be something that when you're in that rural economy and agricultural world, there's so much about your world that depends on the weather and the light and everything else that goes on. So it's just kind of built into my bones, just like it is with most of the people out there, where you don't have a faucet to turn on to water 15,000 acres of cantaloupe or something. So you have to wait for it to rain or something like that. So that's kind of my origin. And one of my uncles, again, kind of primed the pump for me. His name is G. Harvey. Some of you may be familiar with this stuff if you're from the Southwest or from Texas. He's an artist that has been one of the most successful artists in the United States in very, very rare company. He started off when LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was before he was president and probably before he was senator. He would go out and actually be on his ranch and would paint. And that ended up kind of introducing my uncle into the White House. And since LBJ was in the White House, virtually every president, I think until Obama, had a G. Harvey hanging in the Oval Office. And so he was known as the painter of light. He and a couple of others that were somewhat contemporary, but looking at his work, it was just the obsession that he had, and that it just kind of transferred to me, is looking at what light did in the scene rather than the scene and the light happened to light it. It's just a different way of looking at things. And once you kind of got that perspective, it really does change the way you kind of dissect what you're going to do, or you kind of plan out what you're going to do. So that's kind of where I come from and why this would be interesting to me.
I know. I don't know if any of you guys follow him on Instagram, but if you don't, you should check out his stuff. But I've seen Chris's work for the last 4 or 5 years, at least the ones that he's posted, and I think that you guys are going to really get a taste of what he's talking about with a light. And here's a perfect example.
You'll see my screen, all right?
I can see it just fine. It's great.
Okay. So I wanted to just have an excuse to put the logo up so that Linda would be properly respected as the princess she believes that she is. So with just, I guess that is just kind of a starting point. Let me I'll move along fairly quickly, but I would say that while I'm doing my basic introduction, if y'all wouldn't mind in chat, would you just put in the type of photography that you do? It'll help me a little bit to know if I need to maybe use a little bit different examples or some other maybe interpreting some questions to know if it's coming from a birding perspective or from a macro perspective or tabletop product or whatever it might be. It'll be helpful to me just to give me some sense of who we are as we're talking together.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to read off to you a few of these, okay, so that people that are not privy to the chat will kind of know where we're going. So there's wildlife, there's nature, there's macro, there's a lot of bird photography in here. Ben Cowan does underwater photography. A couple of people are in here listing landscape. I actually thought there would be more landscape people in here. When I said Ben Cowan does underwater photography, so does Susan Hansen. So there's a couple of people here. Flowers, garden, It's all over the place, Chris.
Okay, good.
The only thing I don't really see is long exposure and night photography. So, but I do long exposure and night photography. So don't forget about me.
I've dabbled in it a couple of times. So I put my profession as being computer stuff because that after 30 or 40 years, my family still doesn't know what I do. So I work in IT consulting. I have a real technical bent to my approach for things. Not that I'm not a coder. I'm not a technical person as my job, but it's just always been where I've been interested. I've already talked to you a little bit about my roots. Just coming from being in the country, it's not the same thing as living in the city and then driving out into the country. I'm just used to being in that country. And actually, the biggest town that I lived in before I got married, we had about 20,000 people. And when we moved there, my folks said, we're moving to the big city. And that means we're going to have to take the keys out of the truck when we go to town, and we're going to have to lock the doors. So that was a big thing for us. In 1981, I was given my first camera, which is a film camera. There's an SLR, single lens reflex, and it was a Konica, and it was just a good, solid, basic camera. There weren't too many fancy cameras at that point. They just were really, really well made and with really good glass. Within a couple of years, I went to work for a camera store. The company's name was Photogenesis. They were based out of San Antonio, and they got into the business because they wanted to do mail order that's back before we had Amazons and those kinds of things, where people would do mail order business for products and for things that they wanted to get that they could get it cheaper. And my job was really not to be the photography expert. My job was to come in and run the business. And basically, in a period of 2 or 3 years, we tripled the size of it. It was one of the largest camera stores in Texas. It was in Midland, Texas, and at that time there were more millionaires per capita in Midland than there was anywhere in the world. So there was a lot of disposable income, but a lot of our folks that came into the store were just regular folks. And the cameras, there was this push back then about whether or not you would want to go. Everybody was really excited about the Canon AE1 because it had a program mode. It would do all the stuff for you automatically as a kind of a point and shoot, except for focus. And my job was to basically talk them out of that because they would start learning something that was just a point and shoot, and they wouldn't ever progress beyond that. So a large part of what I did with many people who were buying their first camera or trying to understand their existing camera is try to let them understand how it is that this works. What's the next step? Not when they're going to become a master photographer or anything like that, but what is the next thing you can do that you've wanted to do, but you just don't know how? And it became a real revolving door in and out of the camera store. It was not a retail place as much as just kind of a meeting place. I was recruited away from there by a portrait photographer that had been extremely well established, and he wanted me to come to work for him and take over his business. And after about a year or so, I realized that I didn't want to work for him, and I definitely did not want to take pictures of people that I had to pose and that kind of stuff because it just kind of stressed me out. It wasn't really what I liked to do. I was in the camera store, though. I'll do this quickly, but in the camera store, we had every kind of camera you can imagine, everything from huge 5x7 or 8x10 cameras all the way down to a little point and shoot. And so I would take those cameras out, everything in the store, I would take it out and shoot it and try to learn how to shoot it so I could talk to people about it. So I quickly became fairly educated, at least on the basics. And one of the most important things that someone said to me when I was talking to pros about how can I get better as a photographer? I understand what the buttons do on the camera, but how do I get better? And they said the best thing you can do is take some equipment home and open up a dark room and develop your own film and do your own printing, because then you'll have to fix all of the stuff you didn't do right in the camera, and consequently you will learn then how to become a better photographer by just cleaning up your own mess is the way they said it. Couple that with the portrait photographer that I went to work for had 3 women that worked for him and had worked for him for about 30 or 40 years doing physical hand retouching of pictures with tiny brushes, filling out the underlines of someone's eyes and making sure that certain blemishes were gone, those kinds of things, or they would do very, very intricate work. And I got a really a good amount of time watching them and see what they did to transform some of the pictures into just unbelievably. It didn't look like they'd really done anything except it looked amazing. And so my approach when I started looking at a digital camera and when I started looking at Photoshop, I picked up a digital camera for the first time really in about 8 years ago, and I just picked it up and started shooting film again because I'd stopped taking pictures for a while because I've traveled, had about 2 million miles on American Airlines, and so I really didn't have time to do much. So I had the mindset of shooting film and had the mindset of Photoshop as being in the darkroom. And so I didn't learn a lot of the capabilities that were there. I just knew how to do what I knew how to do. And my dad says you have to meet people where they are. And so that's where I was. And when I talk to other people, I just have to figure out where you are and can I help you? So that's my creative methodology. That's kind of the last bullet there. And I'm happy to talk about it in more length, but I'm sure you have more interest than just hearing about me that way. My creative methodology is that I'm not creative. I'm an analytical creative, which means I go about a fairly analytical process to come up with creative ideas. And it's something I learned from a psychologist that was advocating for business people to get better at things that they weren't good at. And the guy's name is Brian Tracy, and he's been the most influential person. I followed him as a motivational speaker and an educator for years and years. And it becomes something you'll hear me talk about, kind of a checklist and things I'm going through. And that's my process. And I will encourage people to do that, even if now people think I'm very creative, but it's only because I do it analytically to get there. So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I do want to know, how many of y'all know who Bob Ross is? Did you watch him paint on TV for 30 years? And if you did, does that have any influence at all on the way you look at and you think about photography and or art, but specifically photography? I find myself going back and things popping into my head from 30 or 40 years ago that I used to watch this and just thought it was just fascinating. So if you have a chance, I'm just curious. It's just I've been surprised how many people actually were avid Bob Ross fans that are photographers that I shoot with. So that to me, that would be interesting to know, and we can talk about that in a minute. I mentioned a little while ago that I'm a business guy, and I've managed teams and I've trained people. And one of the things that we would talk about is people having a purpose and knowing what they're going to do. And the quote of, if you don't know where you're going, any road will be sure to get you there, because you have no idea where you're going. And so it's always about planning things out. And I developed a habit a very long time ago is after we would go on a meeting, whether it's with the executive of a global company that was going with me, or whether it was someone I'm training, the same 2 or 3 questions would be asked by me, which is, what did we know that we didn't expect to come up? You know, what things that we hope would do well that we did well? And I had a couple of questions like that. So this exit interview thing is something I've just always done. I ask myself that to do some debriefing and that kind of stuff. So I guess people who have shot with me are not unaccustomed to the fact that I'll say, you know, did you get what you wanted? You know, did you end up with the picture that you wanted to get? And sometimes people will say, I don't think so. I'm not sure what I wanted. And sometimes people really don't know what to say. And the answer really is they didn't have anything that they wanted. So they really couldn't hit that target. And so that's kind of been my urging for people who shoot with us is to pick something. Don't spray and pray, where you just go out and just shoot all kinds of pictures and hope you get something that's good, but go with the idea of getting something, getting a shot that you're really happy with, that's worth the effort to go through and do it, go develop it or have it processed, and then you want to put it on a wall someplace. That may be a specific subject you want to capture. It may be that subject in a composition that you just saw and you just really thought it was really important to see that white horse that's in the dark background with some dust blowing, whatever it might be. There's something in that you may want to look at. Or if it's flowers, there's a specific flower you've been trying to get, and you're trying to get a really shallow depth of field with a little bit of bouquet in it. All those kinds of things. Those are all good answers of things that we all want to do when we go out and take pictures. The last one on the list, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit, is quite a bit for the rest of the time, is exposure. And I know that my description of this discussion is not very exciting, but it's something that I think is really the heart of what we do. We have a relationship with our cameras, and we have to figure out how to communicate with each other. And one of the things I've just hinted on, and if this is made available to you, I just recommend that you have some sort of a method, some workflow, call it whatever you want to, but create a checklist. Have some priorities, and if you have that shot that you want, I know that, for example, Lynn and I went to shoot, and I pulled over the side of the road, and there's an old barn, and we went and said, let's shoot something. And Lynn just kind of looked at me like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so I said, well, just find something interesting and just shoot it. And I kept asking her those kind of questions, and I think she made something up because she was tired of me asking those questions. But basically, pick something that you want to shoot, whether it's the shadows and the light coming through the holes in the roof, that it hits a certain way. If that's the thing that grabbed your attention, then that's your priority. Shoot what you wanted to get, however you wanted to get it. There's many different perspectives, but have something you saw that caused you to walk to where you are. Ansel Adams says the most important aspect of photography is not how to shoot the camera, but it's where you put your feet. So in other words, get to the right spot, be able to look at things and learn about them quite a bit, about how you want to capture them, but you have to get there first, and you have to have that vision. So the next part of this is just the idea that I mentioned a little while ago when I talked about people that were coming in and they were novices or they were new and they didn't really know what they were doing, and we weren't selling them a point and shoot camera. What I would do is I would take a camera just like the one I originally had, and I would sell the camera over and over. And it was an aperture. It was set up and go in manual and shutter priority or aperture priority. And for most people, they didn't shoot sports, and they really didn't want to control all of the stuff that's there. So I trained them to teach an aperture priority. And I trained them that there's two scenarios that you're going to go into when you leave here. I'm going to give you a roll of 100 ASA, or we call it ISO now, and it was 12 exposures. And if it's daylight, take a picture where the aperture is 5.6 and the speed is at 1/25th of a second. If there was a shadow, either because there's clouds overhead or there's a roof over people's head or it's at night or whatever it might be, if there's a shadow on the subject, put your flash on the camera. And by the way, the flash happened to synchronize at 5, 6, and 1/25th. So really people could pretty much point and shoot and either turn the flash on or off, but they did have to focus. And the guarantee that I gave them is you come back after that first 12 pictures, we'll develop it and we'll sit down and we'll talk about it. And if you don't have a clue what you did, if you don't understand any of it and you're unhappy, I'll give you all of your money back and the film's free. I never once, ever had anybody ask for their money back. Almost always people could say, oh, I remember I did that, and I remember this was what I did wrong, or they pretty much got it. It was just a couple of rules to follow. And then as we would continue to do that, I would continue to give them little homework assignments and little things. We'll go and try this. We'll go and try that. And so it was just really small steps so that they could learn what they were interested in and let their interest take them where they wanted to go. The other thing I talked to them about, which probably, I'm just going to pretend y'all don't know this, but there's something called the exposure triangle. It's a relationship between three pillars in what makes a photograph to be properly exposed and what things have to come together. And that is the aperture or the f-stop that you have on your lens that you select, how long the shutter is open, if it actually was a shutter now, it's really not, how long does it stay open, and how sensitive is the film to be able to capture this. Those have a relationship no matter what you're doing, whether you're underwater, whether you're jumping out of planes, whether you're taking macro work or whatever you're doing. There's a direct correlation between those three elements. And if you get this relationship where you're able to maneuver around through them somewhat, you'll be surprised how flexible you can be at picking up the next thing or something that you're not really sure about. So with that as a basic premise, If I take a 5-gallon bucket, which is in the middle of this triangle, and I say that 5-gallon bucket, the camera's telling me it needs to have 5 gallons worth of water in it to be properly exposed. So if I go get my garden hose and I turn it on full blast and I go over to the bucket, it's going to take, depending on the water pressure, 30 seconds, or maybe to a minute, depending on the circumstances. And that's a good thing that everybody can understand. Almost everybody's done something like that. But if I hand you a fire hose, and it's way bigger, and it's got a whole lot more water that comes out of that fire hose really, really quickly, how long does it take to fill up that same bucket with the same amount of water? It takes a whole lot less time. And that is a way of measuring light. It's a very abstract idea unless you have something concrete that you can really get your arms around to say, now I get it. There's a relationship between how big around that hose is and how fast the exposure is complete, or the bucket gets full. And this, we're assuming right now that we're not really messing with the ISO or with the sensitivity there. Those are the two things that we primarily are going to do over and over and over, that really makes us to be adept, at least at capturing what we're trying to capture. Not necessarily, we're going to embellish on that as we get better, but that triangle is really, really important. And hopefully y'all have heard that, maybe not in that context. Maybe that will give you a little bit of a hook to hang your hat on when you're trying to figure out, what am I doing wrong? Linda said something a minute ago as we were talking before everybody came in about going out and shooting something, and she couldn't figure out why the exposure wasn't right. It's a longer exposure. It was kind of dark. The pictures weren't coming out. Well, it just took a little prompt, and then obviously she knew that she wasn't giving it a long enough time to get enough light in there to expose. The light outside was really, really dark, and so consequently she needed a lot of time for that light to come in and to populate the sensor. So with that in mind, that's one of those things that even though you find yourself kind of out of your element at first, by remembering these very basic things, and I'm trying to give you something that you have a visual clue on rather than an abstract concept that you just can't get your arms around. If you look at the size of the hose that comes out of the fire hydrant, that's like having an F2 or F28. That's your wide open, which means it takes very little amount of time to get the same amount of light in than if you're using a garden hose, which might be at F11 or F16. Those things are exactly the same correlation to each other, mathematically, ratios, whatever you want to call it. They're exactly the same. And the corresponding circle over on the right-hand side of the shutter speed corresponds to that exact combination. So if you're using an aperture priority camera and you set the aperture to 2.8, the camera is going to automatically pick a very fast shutter speed to balance out the amount of light that you have. You don't have to measure how much it is to fill up that bucket. The camera is going to do that for you unless the camera is confused about what you're trying to do. The same thing is if you put it to f16 and you're running an aperture priority, it's going to take a longer time to expose because it has this mathematical relationship already figured out and built into the meter on the camera. So this is quick, but hopefully at least it's an idea that you may be happy to discuss it with you if you want or whatever it might be. But I've been surprised in a way that accomplished people still, they use their camera in a very effective way, but they really didn't quite have this relationship figured out to where it was just something that they owned the idea. So that's an idea that we're going to then kind of build on, but that's the basic thing that I would teach people who are going to walk out who's never had a camera before, and this is what they're going to go take pictures with. Now, this is a picture I took when I was in the Pacific Northwest. And you can see that this picture is challenging. I'm inside, not a cave, but I'm under a ledge. It's about 30 minutes before sunrise. So this is there's a very small amount of light. I'm in kind of a canyon, and there's just not a lot of light there. So I needed to figure out what I wanted to do with this. I'm going to go to the next slide, which will show you 3 different options that I looked at, all of which were in accordance with this triangle that I just talked to you about. The first one on the left-hand side, we're going to explore our choices. We have to get all sides of the triangle to match up. But the one on the far left you're shooting at ISO 200 at f4, which was the widest that lens would go that I had. It took a fourth of a second for me to get enough light to where that would work. Great. If you'll see that the foliage in the background is exposed, if I go back and I didn't point that out, you'll see that the canyon, you can see that it's there. It just was a really long exposure. So in this point here at 200, I have no texture at all in the waterfall. I wanted that texture because it just doesn't look like there's motion. It just looks like there's a curtain hanging there, and I wanted something else that was there. So I captured that at 200. I then took the next, I scoot it over. I took the next one, which is the middle one, and now I'm shooting at the ISO 8000. I didn't change anything else. I changed the f-stop was f4. The camera figured out all by itself that it needed, it was going to give me 1/80th of a second. Well, you can see that there's texture now in that waterfall. The speed that I needed, I just played around with it until I may not have known that ratio, but I knew how to get close to it. And I knew how to look at it, and I'm not doing film anymore, so now I can just look at the back of my camera, and I can see what I did right away, and I can make an adjustment instantly. That's miles and miles away from what I used to have to do when we have to wait a week or two to get your film back. Then you don't even remember what you did when you shot. So people would carry around little notebooks to write down frame number 1, this is what I did. Frame number 2, this is what I did. The third one is I'm shooting at, believe it or not, 12,800 ISO. I'm still shooting at f4, but now I'm at 1/100th of a second. 1/100th of a second can stop lots and lots of things, and the motion of lots of things. It can almost stop anything a person's going to do unless they're really close to the camera. And so I was pretty confident that 100th of a second was going to be about right. But the point is that even though this is a fairly complicated looking picture to take, it really wasn't any more complicated than the first picture I took of the canyon just to see what's it going to do. I recognized the camera was going to help me figure this out based upon, and so in this case, I wanted a faster shutter speed. So I increased the sensitivity from 200 to 12,800, and I got the picture I was looking for. And if I needed to try it 6 or 8 times, who cares? In golf, they say there's no pictures on the scorecard. So who's watching? Do what you want to do to get the picture that you want to get. Don't get in a hurry. Don't worry about it. And so we can explore our choices all around this triangle, and we haven't abandoned anything about the principles of taking a picture. Now, one of the other things that's really important, and I'm kind of moving along because I don't want you to get too bogged down. I don't want us to get too bogged down in some minutia. I just want to get the concepts in place so we can go back and revisit them. But when you look at dynamic range is something we talk about if we're listening to music, and you talk about the dynamic range of an audio system. All of it, how low can it go? How high can it go? How loud can it go? How soft can it go? In photography, we're talking about light, and that light is we perceive the top bar. Hopefully you can see that, but there's a whole bunch of different shades of gray through there. There's about 25 different shades of gray there. And the human eye can see about 25 shades of gray. Our eyes have a dynamic range of approximately 25 f-stops. That's to speak in camera language. We can look at something and see something in the shadows, and we can see something moving around in the shadows that we didn't see until it got our attention. And now with our mind, we can actually see in the shadows. We look at something that's super bright, but we recognize there's a bird up there flying close to the sun, and I can actually go get a picture in my mind through my eyes of that bird because my mind and my eyes work together to adjust to get something that's way beyond what a camera could do. The second line is the red square is what the cameras are typically going to be able to do. For the most part, cameras are going to be somewhere in the 12 to 14 f-stop range. Some of them will be much better, but only under ideal conditions. But it's important to recognize the difference between I see this and I see these things, so I want to take a picture of that, and recognize the camera may not see that. So I need to understand what the camera is telling me it sees so I can figure out how to tell the camera what I need. It's because I want to get a picture of that. I just have to figure out how to communicate what I want. If it's just a snapshot, and I don't have any real particular desire for it, that's okay. Take the picture and see what you think, and you may just move on because you didn't have any particular objectives. But this is a big hurdle. It's one thing to learn how to twist the knobs and pull the triggers on the camera, but to get good photographs of different varying circumstances, you need to be able to gain a better understanding of what the camera sees and how that's different than what you see as a person using much superior capability of looking into various wide ranges of light. Now, inside the camera, inside the handheld, I put that meter up there on purpose because I actually owned a couple of those where I'd walk around and measure light, because my camera that I first got in 1980 didn't have much of a light meter on it. So the standard around every camera, around every light meter, is always around looking at the amount of light that comes off, that's coming bouncing off of a card it's 18% gray. Now, most people know 18% gray, but don't necessarily, I mean, most photographers have heard it, but they don't necessarily know what that means. So if you look at the gradient bar on the right-hand side, 18% gray is right in the middle. It's right in the middle of gray, and it's a known constant. So if someone's going to play the piano, they bring a piano tuner in, and the piano player is going to walk over, and the first thing he's going to do is hit the middle key that's A. And he knows that middle key of A is that sound is at 440 cycles a second. That's the pitch of it. And so he tunes the entire rest of the piano to that one key. And everything now has a constant. Everything now knows this is what I know I'm supposed to do, because I now know how bright and how dark things are, because I can look at that 18% gray card, and it's going to tell me how bright or how dark things are. Otherwise, we have no standard. We don't know if we're in metric. We don't know if we're in furlongs. We don't know what we're measuring in that meter. We have to have something that tells us. So the example of this, showing this, is the person illustrating this took a picture of a Nikon film lens cap on a charcoal background, almost a black background. And he got a very light gray, washed out Nikon lens cap. Then placed the gray card on that right beside the I guess that's a pad or something that's almost black, and then used that to figure out the exposure. He pointed that at the gray card, and the gray card then figured out, oh, this is how much light I have to work with. And now you'll notice he took the gray card out once he had the exposure, and now you see a black lens cap, and you see a virtually black background. This is exactly the opposite. If you've ever tried to take a picture in snow, you wonder, why is the snow gray? Because the camera is trying to figure out how to make something in that picture equate to an 18% gray card. That's its happy place. It's trying to figure out something that it knows where home is, and then it knows what to do beyond that. So we don't have to necessarily carry around a gray card with us if we want to be precise. I know there are people that do that on a regular basis, but it's not necessary. But it's important to know that there is a standard of luminance or brightness or darkness or whatever your reference is, and that standard is there. It's not just made up. It's been there for forever and ever. So 18% gray is what every camera is calibrated around. It's important to know that. So the next thing is we then have a problem at times where we're going to take a picture, and we get through. We go, well, that wasn't what I was taking a picture of. That exposure is totally off. And there's more types of metering mechanisms in a camera than the three I've illustrated, but these are the three most common, or some variations off of this. The one on the far left is called a matrix or an evaluative. We used to just call it averaging, but now things are much more sophisticated at being able to pick. In my case, my camera picks 250 different points in what you can see through the viewfinder. It'll pick 256 different points in that view, and it will sample all of those and come up with what it thinks is the best weighted average. If there's something that's really, really dark, it may change some of the equation it comes up with, versus if the darkest thing is just a little dark. So it's making a fairly complex evaluation, but of the whole scene in general. And so therefore you see it covering the red is what the camera is looking at. Center weighted would be if, I'm not sure if you can see behind that very well, but if you wanted to take a picture of that post with some barbed wire on it, you could aim it kind of at the center of the screen, and it would give you an evaluation of the light that's there, how bright it is based upon the center of the screen. And then if you want to be more specific, the far right is a spot meter. It's about a 2 or 3% wide area that lets you look at a very specific area, because that's the most important thing for you to take a picture of, is that particular area or that particular spot. All of those will give you, in many cases, each one of those will give you a different answer. It may not be drastically different, but in some cases it will be drastically different, depending on the scene, depending on what it is that you're trying to capture, and depending on the light that's in that scene. Now, I use this as an example. These two pictures were taken about 10 inches apart. The one on the right is a lily, and I can't remember his name now. Y'all probably all know what it is. And then I used to know the names of these, but the purple plant on the left-hand side is iridescent and very vibrant and comes in all different kinds of colors. I can tell you that the exposure between those two are really different, because the one on the right has bright white with the sun shining on it. And it also has some dark shadows underneath the leaves. The one on the left is fairly mid-tone, kind of across the board, but it has dark shadows, but not a lot of, there's some little small points of brighter stuff that's in the texture, but not to the same degree that it would be on the one on the right. So the camera looked at that and figured out how much light was coming back to the sensor, and it then adjusted. We'll talk about histogram in a minute, but you see these two squares in the middle at the bottom that have this looks like an equalizer that you set in your audio. The one on the left looks different than the one on the right, because it was actually picking up more detail in the shadows on the far left than it did on the far right. So this is just an example that says this is not a different time, it's not a different place, it's not different light, but we're looking at the light that is reflected off of a gray card. So when I take your picture, if I was going to take Linda's picture, the camera is going to look at Linda and see how much light is coming off of her. There is a way to go measure the light that's coming and hitting her, but the variable is depending on the color that she wears, depending on exactly how iridescent it is, or if it's black, it's not going to reflect a lot of light. There's no constant there. There's no way to figure out how much light is bouncing off of her, but the camera can figure it out. And so that's why we look at reflective light and not at direct light. Direct light is very, very difficult to manage unless you're being ultra precise in very controlled circumstances. But you can see that the camera was able to figure this out real well by itself, even though it didn't appear, unless I already knew this, and I was thinking about this presentation when I took these pictures, because I knew what was going to happen. I knew the camera was going to figure it out correctly, but it's going to come up with a different answer for both of these pictures. Now, we talked about a histogram, and let me just explain the two simple elements that are here. The height of the wave that you see, of the peaks and the valleys, is determining how many pixels, how many different spots on the sensor is picking up light. It's all bright. It's how much of it is dark, how much of it is light, and this gives you the amplitude. It gives you the volume of light that's coming in each small little spectrum, or each one of these little gray zones that we looked at a minute ago. And so you're going to see that's how much there is in that left to right from black. You see in the far left-hand column, it says black, and the far right-hand column, it says white. This is that spectrum that we looked at a minute ago that says this is what the camera can see. So if we have one of these that's running off where the wave is all the way off, it's just like banging into the right-hand side and you can't see what's the rest of the wave, that means there's a whole lot of light there that the camera's not going to catch. It doesn't know it can't catch it. It doesn't know where the light went. The same thing if it looks like it's all like a snowbank all up against the left-hand side. That means there's a lot of detail in some of the shadows and the dark areas that it's not going to pick up any details at all. It's just flat, plain black. So that's what the two things are. From right to left, it's black, 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 black to white, white, white. That's what the histogram does. And then it shows you some kind of an indication of just how much light is in each of those different spectrums. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm sure that there may be some other people who more eloquently describe that, but to me, I'm just trying to get a sense of so what when I look at this. So what does this mean? And I don't need to know all of the fancy scientific stuff. I just need to know so what when I'm trying to take a picture. So then let's translate this. Here's a chart of some examples. And there's one thing I'm going to tell you about that I disagree about this chart. If you look at the top, you have an example of everything piled up on the left-hand side. So it's underexposed. Everything's dark. There's not going to be a whole lot other than a lot of the details can be lost off the spectrum. The camera's not going to be able to see it. And so the conclusion is that it's underexposed and therefore it's an error. When you expose to the left, it means that that the majority of the light that you're picking up is fairly dark. It's fairly in the darker gray areas, and it's not really seeing much that's white. It's not seeing it's not seeing highlights. It's not seeing bright areas. There may be some there, but it's not the bulk of what it's seeing. It's a fairly dark scene, or it's being exposed too dark for the amount of light that's there. So the settings are somehow off. The ideal exposure, quote unquote, is when everything fits between the sidelines. You have the dark darks are not running off the edge to the left. The bright whites are not running off the edge to the right. So all of the stuff you're looking at, everything that camera's pointing towards, it's collecting all of the light, or virtually all of the light that you could expect it to collect. So it's well within its element to do that. You may hear people talking about exposed to the right, or ETTR, which some people will abbreviate it that way. That means that the bias, or the amount of light that's being collected, is predominantly more in the lighter area of the spectrum, and so therefore it isn't really running off the edge to the right, just maybe a tiny bit, and it's really not running off the edge to the left, but there is a whole lot of light that's being captured, but it's all in that bright area. The bottom one is deemed to be overexposed, and they basically are saying it's not a useful picture. It's overexposed. There's just too much stuff that's lost. On the right-hand side, there's a lot of detail and bright light that's just going to be pure white. Now, the reason why I'm saying that I don't agree with this, first of all, I agree with this. I agree that this is the way you read a histogram, but we haven't turned over the camera and said, go take pictures for me. We have to tell the camera what it is we're taking pictures of. We have to figure out, just because I look at a particular scene doesn't mean I want to capture all of the details in the dark or all the details in the light. I may have something particular in mind that I want to take pictures of. So here's one of my pictures. That was a dark scene. It was very early. It was cloudy, heavy clouds, a little bit of light poked through for just a minute, and it lit up the masts and lit up the part that's white. But again, look at the bottom left corner, and there's my histogram of a properly exposed picture that is what I wanted. The camera helped me, but I looked at what it said was properly exposed, and it's way too bright. That's not the scene. I don't want to get something. I'm looking for that mood. I'm looking for something that has those dark elements in it, because this is a very dark scene. It doesn't do me a lot of good to take a picture of a really bright, sunny day looking picture of a dark scene. It's just not what I'm looking at. So this is where I'm saying we need to understand if we're way off base. If we're trying to take a picture of a flower in the middle of the day, in the middle of a field, and it's way, way off to the left or way, way off to the right, then we probably need to check something, because we're probably off. But this is a proper representation of what I saw and why I wanted to take this picture. Hopefully that makes sense. You can see that it's weighted to the left, but you also notice there's almost nothing falling off the left. So there's some really completely black areas, but not very much, just a little bit here and there. And so that's why I wanted that particular picture. Now here's another example, totally different. This is in Oregon, and we worked to this place. We shot sunrise. It was kind of meh. It was not that great. And then we got a second sunrise. The sun came up and went behind a bank of clouds, and there was no color, there was nothing. Then all of a sudden, it rose again out of that bank of clouds, and we got all this incredible color. And so we have this line that goes across the peak, we have dark shadows that are there, but we also have a lot of bright areas. Now, in this case, there are some detail that's being lost on the left-hand side. I had to make a choice if I wanted to have it be representative of what I was looking at. I wanted to have the detail in the top of the peak, in the clouds. I wanted there to be enough detail there that I could capture that. And the reality of it is that charcoal black rock, or almost charcoal black, was in the shadow, and it really wasn't getting much light at all. So the fact that the detail wasn't captured as much as it could be was actually pretty accurate, because there just wasn't much there to look at. That wasn't the point. That's not the subject. That's not the composition I was most interested in. If I wanted to turn, which I did in other cases, and take a picture down that way, the exposure was different, and I got all kinds of detail in the rocks. But that's a different subject. That's a different composition. So looking at this histogram, you can see that this represents the picture that we're looking at accurately, even though it's not, quote unquote, the ideal exposure for everything fitting in this nice bell curve. The next one is also quite a bit different. It's very, I won't say monotone. It's one color, basically. It's different colors of green, but the lightness and the darkness of it was just really cool. The light hit those cypress trees, which were much brighter, yellower green, and those trees in the background that weren't cypress were much deeper green, and they had a lot of shadow back into them. Actually, more than actually represented here, but if I would lose detail if I tried to do that. So if you see this, there's a lot of dark areas here with just little spots of highlights here and there in the texture. The trees are really bright. You see the grass in the foreground. That's kind of a shapeless thing, except for we see these little bits of light hitting the blades of grass, and now that gives it some texture, but it doesn't change it from what it is. It's in the shadow. And so we see that all over the picture. And so the histogram on this is really, really dark. And if you look at the histogram really close, it isn't a whole lot of it's not really falling off the left-hand side, but just an awful lot of it is dark, dark, dark. And so this is an accurate representation of what it looked like in the picture I was taking. So again, it's not a bell curve like we saw in the other. It's not an error. It does represent the scene. I'm the one who had to figure that out. I'm the one who had to tell the camera, no, it's okay. I want the dark stuff. I like the dark stuff. I don't want the bright colors all blown out. This is what I want. And that's my job, is to help the camera understand what I'm shooting for, pun intended. And this is the last one of these examples, and that is this is a house I shot a number of times before it eventually just fell down. In this case, you see over in the left-hand area, you see shadow from the light that's behind the clouds. You see the sun rays that are brightening things up, but you also see quite a bit of shadow in there because it's fairly strong light, but even though it's not hitting it directly. So there's quite a bit of shadow in the space, and there is quite a bit of light, but it's not bright white. And so again, this is a fairly accurate representation, which, by the way, I'll mention this. In this case, the histogram almost looks like the scene itself, because you have a lot of dark stuff and it's kind of mounded up on the left-hand side, and the light stuff is kind of a peak in the middle of that and kind of over on the right middle. That's not always the way it works. It doesn't always map to the actual scene itself. You'll have to look at it and see, you may have bright spots that may pop up, but you may not. So let me move along here. Are we running out of time?
Well, we are. We've got a few more minutes.
Okay.
I'm not going to cut you off. So I want you to finish, because I want this whole thing to be kind of a nice package. So Don't worry about that.
So here are some helpful camera settings. Make sure that whatever camera you have, figure out where it is that you can see the histogram. There's two versions of the histogram. One of them is on the screen that you can see while you're actually getting ready to take the picture to make your decisions. And the other one is when you hit the review or to play what you actually just captured. And sometimes they may be off a little bit there. Next, what meter mode am I in? I need to have quick access. I need to know where it is, or I need to get a button that I can push quickly to change it from a spot meter to a wide open area or whatever. And in some cameras, there are things that for a lot of people are very irritating. It's lights inside the camera that while you're getting ready to take the picture, they're flashing, doing all kinds of stuff, and they're trying to give you an alert that says this red stuff that I'm flashing says it's way overexposed, and the dark blue stuff that I'm flashing says it's way in the shadows. If you have those, turn them on at least until you kind of get the sense of where that is and the relationship between the histogram and those things. They do drive me crazy because they get in my way. I know it's overexposed, and it's like it's nagging at me. So if you can't get all of the information into one set of histogram, that's when you then go to a bracket. That means you take a picture of that exact same scene where it's underexposed by a couple of stops, or by one or two or whatever. And at that point, it's now going to go and it's going to give you, because you're shifting everything to the left, that means all of that super bright stuff that was on the right-hand side now is coming into play, and the camera is now going to capture the detail that's in that really bright stuff. And when you move it, when you overexpose the next shot, when you overexpose by two stops or so, one or two, then all of that stuff that was lost in the black shadows, now that detail can be captured. So if it actually does span outside of what the histogram can represent, that's okay. You just need to recognize that, and you have to decide if you care enough to go through the extra steps of doing this. And I'm just going to tell you this. It doesn't make sense, but the farthest stop that you capture in your camera has 50% of all of the data that it's going to capture in that one stop. It isn't peanut buttered across the whole thing. So when people tell you to shoot to the right, 50% of it is in that very last stop that you capture. Half of that is 25% is on the next stop. And then the next area over is now 12%. I've got a red circle around that because that's 75, that's 82%, 87% of all of the data that you could capture is in those stops over there on the far right-hand side. So if when you get home and you've missed some stuff off the right, you can get in there and get into the Lightroom or Photoshop, and you can get it kind of tweaked a little bit, but you're playing with only about 10 or 15% of the data. It's going to look scratchy. It's going to look noisy. It's not going to be sharp. And so as much as you may not think that has to do with sharp and has to do with richness and depth, there's more to it because the data is lopsided to the right-hand side. So we can talk about that more if you want to know about it. That's not new information, but it's new in my vocabulary to actually use. Now, if you want to get the most you possibly can get out of the dynamic range that you can go after, you want to, first of all, understand your histogram, play around with it, and for that matter, change the knobs around and just look and see what it does. Just watch what it does and then take pictures and then see what did you get out of that. Try exposing where you're not losing what you want to capture off the right-hand edge. Just expose a little bit more to the right so that you have more of data that you're collecting. Remember, you're holding a computer. You think you're holding the camera. You're holding a computer that has a lens stuck on the front of it. And computers are in the job of collecting information. That's what you're trying to get it to do, is to collect as much information as you can. Now, if you're shooting in JPEG, that's great. They come out of the camera. They're pretty easy to use. But a JPEG is super, super small amount of data. It's kind of like the equivalent of one sheet of paper. That's how deep the data is on the JPEG. But if you shoot in RAW, it's like the equivalent of a ream of paper. So in my case, it's a 5 megabyte file is a JPEG. A 50 megabyte file is a RAW file. That's 10 times more data that I can capture, that I can work with, that I can deal with some of these issues we're looking at. You want to capture as much dynamic range as you can. Shoot at low ISO, as low as it makes sense. And then you can create HDR images where you're putting some of these things like bracketed pictures together that kind of expands the reach of the camera. So those are things you can do, and each one of those things could I'm sure be a session for us to talk about. Here's my suggestion on a shot list, okay? When you get out of the car, when you walk up to a spot, the first thing to do is decide on what is the clear center of your attention before you even start looking through the camera. Then don't just start looking through the camera. You look back and forth, both through the camera and then outside of the camera, because you're not seeing things the same way in each way. Get a perspective of both. And so don't just keep your eye buried inside the camera as you're trying to figure out what composition you want to have. Most cameras, I'm sure most of yours do, will have a button somewhere on there that will magnify the image in your viewfinder or the image that you captured by 10 times. That means it's like using a zoom that's instead of 50, it's like 5,000 or something. It's 50, I guess. No, so it's something that gives you a much closer look. And at that point, you can see, is it focused, like I think it is? And number two, was there detail in that white stuff that I thought was okay, or did I lose detail? Or was there detail in my shadows down over there? If you get used to doing that all the time, you're going to go home with good information. Remember the exposure triangle. Pay attention to where the light's coming from. Sometimes it's coming from off to the side, and it may give you some challenges at light and shadows coming in different places on your screen, but it also may give you some incredibly good texture. And you may want to start looking at ways to use the different direction of that light. Also, don't just assume that the camera that you left it in perfect pristine shape. It may be that you got leftover settings and you're getting pictures that are left over because you may have had some real strange settings that you set and you didn't put it back to what you're used to getting. So that's my talk. I will tell you that I'll do this really quick, Linda. I have my own challenge. I play games with myself. I have a tree in Prosper, Texas, and my challenge is to take a picture of that tree in so many different ways that it almost doesn't look like the same tree. It's just trying to get me to be more creative. So here's two pictures. This one on the left was the first picture I took. The one on the right was about a month or so later. And then over the next few pictures here, it goes over a couple of years. But the point is, each one of these pictures is properly exposed of the same place, slightly different times. One of them is a reflection because there was a big puddle there on the left-hand side. The light was actually coming from behind me for sunrise and vice versa. And then there's this one, which has other things in the foreground. This is a game that I play with myself. Like I may go out and shoot with a really wide angle lens, and that's the only lens I'm taking. And I have to figure out how to get a shot I want with only that really wide lens. That sort of thing allows us to not get in a rut, allows us not to see things only through, like we're looking through a paper towel roller. We need to see the whole world that's out there and see all of the different tools we have and how we can capture different things. And with that, I give my time back, Madam President.
It's Your Majesty or Your Highness. I thought you knew that.
I didn't trust you with either one of those words.
So, is that okay? I thought you had I shrunk down my image real quick. Is this your last?
It is.
Where is the screen that has all your contact information? Is that
it's on the front.
On the front. Okay, that's okay. I'm going to get you to take down your screen if you don't mind.
Sure.
I was scanning through here. There aren't any questions in the chat, but I'm going to say a couple of things. One is, I wish I'd known this like 5 years ago, because this is one of the most difficult things I had to learn when I started shooting in manual was understanding the histogram. And I'm hoping that anybody that's having problems with histogram stumbles upon this session, because I think you broke it down really nicely and cleanly. I'm seeing some nice comments for you, and I'll make sure you get that the chat later when we finish. So one of the things I'm disappointed in is that you didn't show enough pictures. And so what I'm going to do, and I'm going to put you on, I'll just put you on the spot. I'd like for you to come back, because I know some of the work that you are doing is really, I've used this word twice today, and I don't use the word grandeur, but you take grand landscapes. And can I talk you into coming back and doing one on landscapes?
Sure, be happy to.
Okay, good. See, that was easy. And you're proving again that very few people say no to me. So that makes me very happy.
Well, that's really important to you, Lynn. So, Linda, so that's.
Don't get us confused because you keep calling me Lynn and Linda.
I
So
know, I know, I know.
he's referring to just Lindsay, who's in this room. So
That's right.
she's one of his shooting partners. No, he just drags her along because he doesn't like to shoot by himself. So you guys, you can, well, first of all, Chris, thank you so much for doing this because
Sure.
your presentation is much more technical and, but it's necessary, especially when we're trying to, be better, learn more with our cameras. And I hope that somebody else in this room got something out of it. And it wasn't just me. But you guys, you can connect with Chris on Instagram at Fitch Photo and through his website, cfitchphoto.com. And I'll be sure to include that in the show notes. So the last session of the year is scheduled for December 15th. And I thought it would be fun to do a show and tell to celebrate the images that you've made this year. And on the 15th, I'll have you join us on screen to talk about your image, maybe what inspired you, maybe one of the speakers kind of nudged you into trying something different. And if you'd like to share that, we're going to do this called behind the shot. So if you want to share an image and the story behind it, please send me your photo at cousinlinda@gmail.com. And the deadline is tonight, December 1st, but I'll extend it to you tomorrow to give you an opportunity to get your shot in because, I've got quite a few already. So I'm pretty excited because a lot of the images I'm seeing are ones that I've not seen in Instagram feeds. So this is going to be fun to hear the stories behind them. Next week.
One comment I'll make, Linda, just as a side note.
Mm-hmm.
I've sat in some workshops with people that were extraordinary professionals that have made a ton of money in this industry, and they're giants in photography as far as I'm concerned. But when you get back to the core of the images they've captured, they don't print in the enlargements very well. They don't have enough data. It's not necessarily, there's a lot of noise and having to work really hard at it. So while this seems like a very simple thing, it's a bedrock that you can do a really good job, but when you try to do something with it, it may look not like you want it to. So this is both an advanced idea and it's a very preliminary idea. Every football team, every baseball team, you're going to hear them talk about getting back to the basics. That's what this is. It's rich territory.
And I'm not going to disagree with you because I have a lot of those shots that I thought were great shots until I look on my computer screen and they look like crap because there's so much noise. There's not enough data that we're on the other end, I've blown out. So there's no details. And, sometimes I'll post it and go, it's good enough for Instagram. But honestly, it's a shot that I probably should have deleted. So I get that. And hopefully I've learned something that I can apply as I go forward with my photography. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, absolutely. Next week, guys, Noah Buchanan with Hunt's Photo and Video is going to return to present a presentation called All About Lenses. So if you're thinking about adding a new lens to your camera bag, please join us for this informative presentation that Noah has put together. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.